Welcome to the MS Dev Show, episode number 163. This week we talk with Troy Hunt about how terrible your security is, confusing images for self-driving cars, and is MS Paint being killed off? No.
This episode of the MS Dev Show is brought to you by Expose, the market leader of .NET and Java APIs for file business formats. Natively work with DocX, XSLX, PPT, PDF, MSG, MPP, image formats, and many more. Raygun gives you complete visibility on errors, crashes, and performance problems affecting your end users. Replicate issues in seconds rather than digging through log files or having to rely on users to report errors or crashes. Raygun gives you a window into how users are really experiencing your software applications. Check it out today at raygun.com.
This week we have Troy Hunt, Microsoft Regional Director and Independent Security Researcher. How's it going, Troy?
Yeah, I'm always good down here.
Yeah, down in the sunshine, right? So you're down in Australia.
I'm down in the sunny part of Australia as well. I don't think a lot of people realize how big the place is here, but at the moment we've got people that are snowboarding at the same time as me sitting in the sun on the beach. So
really?
It's a big spot.
Oh, that's interesting. I've been to Brisbane, which was an amazing place. So
yeah, right.
I need to go check out some of the other areas though, because I just loved it down there. The food was good, the weather was good. Well, the weather, especially in the winter. Well, yeah, I think. Yeah, the weather was good when I was there.
Yeah,
I know some areas can get hot, and like you mentioned, it varies. I mean, that was kind of what blew my mind was even the cities along the coast there. You know how different the weather patterns are. It was pretty amazing. Okay, so Carl, what do we have for the comment of the week?
The comment this week came from Darren Evans on our website. 2 episodes ago, we talked about that news article where they were encoding that animated GIF into bacteria, and he said that GIF in bacteria did blow my mind. My next step would be to go completely meta and make a GIF of the first iteration in a session of Conway's Game of Life and stuff that in there, which is really cool when you think about that.
Yeah.
We also talked about that episode about salaries and negotiation and stuff like that. And he says he really likes what's going on in the software industry surrounding salary transparency. It's one of the reasons he's working towards a career change in the industry. 2 notable companies leading the way are Buffer, and we've talked about them quite a bit, and that crazy gang over at Stack Overflow with its salary calculator. The default to transparency mindset needs to be adopted by all sectors of the industry as well as politics.
I agree.
And that's something that we hold here quite a bit too. We love to be as open as possible. Mm-hmm. And if you want to get mentioned on the show, just like Darren did, send us an email to feedback@msdevshow.com, comment on Facebook, YouTube, or Stitcher. And we really like those 5-star iTunes reviews.
Absolutely. Okay, let's jump into the news. The first one, who uses AWS and who uses Azure?
Yeah, this comes from the Stack Overflow blog, and they've showed or kept track of all the tags that have ever been used on their site, what questions are tagged with what, and they kind of tracked Azure and AWS. And what I found kind of interesting is, I mean, there's been some variations here and there, but for questions opened with those tags, it's been pretty even tracking for the different services. I think a little early on, Azure had a little bit of a lead, and more recently, AWS does, but they're pretty close. Mm-hmm. They also show a graph of once those questions are opened, who goes to those. And AWS is trending a little bit higher than Azure. So I thought that was interesting, considering that the questions opened are so similar. Mm-hmm. And then they even go so far as to technology stack for each one. Obviously, you might see a little bit more C# on Azure, and you see a little bit more Node.js on AWS. Mm-hmm. But kind of like a lot of the rest, they're kind of huddled together. So outside of those 2 technologies, they're pretty similar.
Mm-hmm. And take all of this with a grain of salt, because as one of the comments pointed out, I mean, this is based off of Stack Overflow questions, so mm-hmm. like if you're happily using Node.js on Azure, then you're not going to
ask a question.
Yeah, you wouldn't be counted in this. I'm not saying that, it's not without issue, but that is something that would skew the numbers one way or another. Any other comments on that one? Okay, Microsoft Paint to be killed off after 32 years. It's funny when I saw this on one of the sites, the way that they had this one stated, it sounded like the end of, you know how we have like the crazy end of support lifespan. I thought it was like, oh, this is your warning. 32 years from now, like support will end for Paint. But no. So this one, I think there's a lot of misinterpretation out there, right, Carl?
Yes. First of all, you know, there is going to be a Paint product in there, but I think that's Paint 3D is going to be out there.
Yeah.
So we're not going to be entirely without it. But, you know, I think as somebody who's at least my age and grew up with computers, I remember as a middle schooler going shopping with my parents for a computer, and I would be sitting there with the spray can on paintbrush, you know, just making all sorts of little designs in Best Buy or wherever we were at the time. So it is a little bit nostalgia, although at the same time, as we move forward through my professional career, I only open Paint by accident because I have Paint.net installed. So
yeah, I always
at the same time,
I have fond memories of Mac Paint. And there were no colors back then. I lived in a time before color, so there were different patterns of paintbrushes and stuff like that. So I actually I haven't used Paint much. I end up using Paint.net. We'll have to include a link in the show notes. I recently changed the edit menu in Windows. So whenever I right click on an image and I hit edit, I set it up so it opens up Paint.net. That actually requires a registry edit, believe it or not. But I can,
or you could just do open with.
Sure. But I mean, the edit, you don't have to go into a nested menu and then pick from a menu. You just pick edit. So, I'll have that tip in there for everybody. But yeah, I mean, it's deprecated, and I don't know, the rest of this isn't too clear though either. Right. We'll have to see what actually happens with this. Because there's definitely a vocal minority of people that are upset about this. So we'll have to see what actually happens with that. This image is why self-driving cars come loaded with many types of sensors.
Yeah, so the leading image on this article by the MIT Technology Review shows a minivan that on the back of it has a bunch of bicyclists on there. And it shows kind of like you've seen those machine learning boxes where they put a box around something and with the descriptor of what it thinks it is. Mm-hmm. And it's labeling these items, which are a picture on the back of the minivan. They're labeling them as a bicycle and as a person.
Yeah. And it probably thinks that they're really close too. And it's probably freaking out the system.
Yeah. And, I think that in this case, it's not something horrible because it's going to be a little bit more cautious.
Yeah.
But, it makes you think there are things that maybe people might be putting on the back of these vehicles to trick automated vehicles into hitting them more often and claiming some sort of insurance or something. I mean, you think about how it works.
The car's driving the wrong direction.
Yeah, it could put some image of a vehicle that looks like it's really far away.
Oh, geez.
You know what I thought when I saw this? I'm thinking like these are like static pictures. Do we not have the technology to see that this thing isn't moving? Nope. It's probably not a bike or a person.
Nope, we haven't invented that
yet. Yeah, we may actually have a long way to go.
Yeah, so that was the point, is like combining multiple sensors. And actually, based on a story that we covered in a previous episode. So Troy, I don't know if you've seen that the machine learning algorithms that played Miss Pac-Man, but what they did, it was pretty clever. They actually had a whole bunch of different algorithms. They had one that its goal was to avoid enemies, and another one was to, get pellets, and they all had sort of a priority about how bad they wanted to do the thing that they wanted to do. So they were saying, the one that was trying to avoid enemies would say, go left because there's an enemy to the right. And then the other one would say, well, I want you to go right because there's a pellet there. But the one that was scoring for the enemies had a higher priority. So, that kind of reminds me of this, like you'd have all these separate systems and they would all sort of have a score. There's like the visual system saying one thing, and then the depth system is saying something else. Like, no, there's just one van in front of you. But in this case, I don't know. Again, you mentioned the depth sensors, but honestly, if you were working on that machine algorithm and you got this strong signal that you're about to hit a bike or something like that, I would think that you would put that in as a pretty high priority and you try to avoid that, even if the depth sensor doesn't show that data. But anyway, it just kind of shows the complexity and how interesting some of these problems are. And then if you want to make it even more interesting, now you put this into the trolley problem, right? So now you have, I don't know, you have somebody crossing the street with a baby, and then it has a choice between hitting the baby or hitting the back of this van, but it thinks the van is actually 3 bikes and a van. And it's like, well, hang on, I'm going to kill, 2 people instead of 3. So then you're going to have people being malicious, I don't know, pictures of babies on the back of their vehicle or something.
I wonder if they're actually that self-aware. I've heard this thing before. This you have to make an ethical decision, like how many people do you kill? But I don't know. Like if anyone does know, actually, I would love to find out. Like, are these self-driving cars aware enough to make moral judgment decisions, or is it just like these are objects, let's not hit them?
Yeah, Carl and I have argued over this before. And so to answer your question, I would say right now, no, I don't think they are self-aware enough. I mean, I don't think we're to that point. But the point that I've always made, and I've stuck to it, is the fact that the computer and the sensors over time are going to get to a level of sophistication where it does understand it, right? So it looks at this, eventually it's going to look at this scene here. I mean, we can see that it's on a car. And there's no reason why a computer can't do the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. So it's going to say, okay, there's a Jeep on the left, there's a van in front. That van has some pictures of bicycles. I'm just going to ignore that. And there is a baby over here, and a bus full of children over here. And it's going to get into that situation where it has a choice to make. Somebody has to. I just feel like we're going to have to score that at some point. I mean, if you avoid scoring it, then then what do you tell somebody? Like, you'd have to actually run that simulation, right? Like we run cars into walls right now to test how safe they are. Like you'd say this machine learning algorithm is so complicated, I don't understand it. So I'm going to have to set up this crazy convoluted scenario. I'm going to have to see what happens. And then I'm going to have to see if I agree with it. So even if you disagree that you ever have to solve that problem, you would be able to test it and see what it does. And then people could say, I disagree with the decision it made and I want you to tweak it. And it could happen through legislation. Thoughts? Okay. Well, that was just a light topic there. Any final remarks, Carl, before I move on?
Nope.
Carl's like, oh, I'm not.
We'll get sidetracked.
Yeah. We need a whole episode on that one. Okay. Raspberry Pi Simulator. Microsoft creates online tool for prototyping projects. This is pretty cool.
Yeah. Microsoft has built an online simulator. So this isn't just a simulator where you download and run. You actually go to azure-samples.github.io/raspberry-pi-web-simulator, and they have a little example of, a Raspberry Pi with a sensor and an LED, and you can actually hook it up to your own Azure IoT Hub account in Azure and run your own code against it, which is really cool. Mm-hmm. And not only that, but this is pretty early days. Like if you want to add additional sensors and stuff, you can code for it, but the image that represents that isn't going to update at this point. They're going to be adding more and more features like that. But if you don't really want to like go out and put the effort of ordering a Raspberry Pi, but you still want to play around with it, this might be a good way to get going on that.
Yeah. Very well said. I'm not sure what to add to that. I was wondering if there's a tool like because obviously the Raspberry Pi just runs Linux, right? So, I mean, you could run a Linux VM. I'm wondering if there's like a simulation tool as well that you could run within there for additional prototyping. But this is kind of cool for doing like the GPIO stuff. And our last news story here, the $1 million homepage as a decaying digital artifact. I found this one far more interesting than I thought. I remember when this site was popular.
Yep, I remember when they were first getting, selling these pixels. So
yeah, and I really hate the guy who made it. Yeah, out of Jones.
So for the people that don't remember or recall what we're talking about, the $1 million homepage.com was a website where somebody was selling off 10 by 10 blocks of pixels for like $1 a pixel.
$1 pixel, yep.
And, in an effort to make $1 million, which is why it was called the $1 million homepage. And what's interesting is, he sold out all of the pixels, and you could have whatever pixels you wanted on there, and you could have them linked to whatever website. Mm-hmm. And this article kind of is like, however many years later, what is it, like 12 or 15 years after it ended, kind of is like, what is the status of this right now? And you can go there and you can see the pixels as they were when he last sold everything. The thing that I thought was really interesting is how the links either have died or redirected, or in some cases are still active. And there's some interesting stats on that as well.
Yeah, that's the part that I found interesting. Is like half the links are dead. These people
and then they
spent all this money for this advertising, and now they have nowhere to send it to.
And then they equated the number of pixels for those links into like how much money was 12 years later doesn't redirect anymore or is dead.
Yeah. Exactly. Very cool. Did you, Troy, when that was popular, were you aware of it?
I honestly can't recall it. I mean, I'm just looking at it now, and all right, it's an absolute eyesore. So there's that.
Are you having seizures?
I was like, I was clicking around, going, I wonder where this actually goes, and it just like sort of hearing it for the first time now. It's kind of like one of these crazy sort of web heyday things that it just made absolutely no sense, but somehow it stuck. That is
the guy was like in his early 20s, I think, and he put it up there and made $1 million. It's just ridiculous. And then of course everybody copied this, and all the copycats, of course, it just required. It sat there for a while, but then all these news outlets picked it up, and they basically made him that $1 million by promoting this thing. I mean, he got a whole bunch of free advertising out of it, and then sold these pixels. And I don't know. It's funny how it's kind of like a secondary market for advertising, and very successful. Okay. Well, let's talk to Troy for the reason that Troy is here, which is security, which is actually a fascinating topic. Like I love the stuff that you put out there. It's great. And I love it also whenever you kind of stick it to these companies whenever they're doing something stupid, because there's so many times when I see like really stupid behavior and I'm like, that's stupid. And I wish I could articulate why. And then you come along and you're just like, you articulate it perfectly. And I'm just like, yeah, you go, Troy. So thank you.
It's funny.
Thank you for your service.
I do these workshops and trainings, and I'll go into companies and teach them about security things, and they'll go, "We've got you in here so that we don't end up on your blog." And I was like,
that's awesome.
I had not thought about this was not a plan, right? But somehow that actually works out okay, and I'm quite okay with it.
Yeah. Well, that's got to be great. I mean, that's actually got to feel just great, like catching, having them like say, oh, we're going to do this, this, and this. And you're like, no.
It does feel a little bit like a protection scheme when they put it like that. But, hey, the ends to that is normally very good for everyone.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I guess kind of the place that we're going to start here, we'll start with, we keep seeing all these these high profile companies that end up getting hacked. Sony is the one that really like pops into my head. Right. And they ran into the situation where, supposedly, like the CIO or the CTO was saying, hey, I need $1 million. Like, we're insecure. Somebody's going to hack us, or, whatever the dollar amount may be, please let me spend this money. I want to fix this issue. This is like super obvious. Otherwise we're going to get hacked. And they say no. And then of course they got hacked. So like how hard is it for these companies to secure their system? I mean, is this just like a losing battle? Is this just impossible?
So there was a case recently which I think resonates with this. So everyone saw this WannaCry ransomware, right? This was a couple of months ago. Mm-hmm. And WannaCry got a massive foothold in the NHS in the UK, which is like the national health system. It's the, you get sick, you go to the doctor, they're plugged into NHS, you go to the hospital. It's NHS. It's a massive part of keeping everyone healthy. And they got hit really bad with this. And we're sort of going, well, hang on a second. Like we had a situation where Microsoft came out. They said, here's a critical patch. You should really take this. Mm-hmm. And then a month later, we had this sort of shady shadow crew or shadow brokers crew dump all these exploits that were allegedly stolen from NSA, which had exploits that Microsoft had patched a month earlier. And then a month after that, this WannaCry thing comes and owns people. And you're going, you had 2 months to patch your things. Like, why wasn't it done? And I think the point here, to your observation as well, which is why aren't organizations getting this stuff right? I can imagine some poor IT manager in the NHS or some poor CIO in Sony saying, we need money in order to protect ourselves, in order to look after these things. And someone's holding the purse strings and they're saying, okay, you need X number of dollars right now. What's it going to save us? And so, well, right. I don't know. We might not get hacked. All right, well, if we do get hacked, what's it going to cost us? I don't know. It could be bad. And what I find is that you're trading off a very sort of discrete, tangible, immediate cost with a potential return on it later on. And I can see how this makes their life very, very hard, particularly when in so many organizations, technology is seen as a cost, right? You know, I mean, there's technology that costs us money. There's sales and marketing that makes us money. We've got to try and reduce the cost.
Been there, done that.
We have all probably been there and done that.
Yep.
And I think this is what's going on within a lot of these organizations.
Yeah, that's painful.
So how is we as developers and IT professionals, I mean, a lot of what you were saying before, that's like, you know, business decisions, but how can we, the rank and file developers and IT pros, help prevent these incidents where we work?
Well, I think one of the things we've got to recognize is that there are aspects of security where the difference between doing it well and doing it bad is not a cost thing. And I'll give you a good example. Let's take SQL injection. So SQL injection is still a massive thing. So all these years later, it is still up there as the number one risk on the web, at least according to OWASP. So OWASP, the Open Web Application Security Project, they create this document of the top 10 web application security risks. And they've got a candidate release for 2017 at the moment. And it's basically the same as 2007 in terms of that number one risk. SQL injection. Now, you can write code which is entirely resilient to SQL injection, and it is the same number of lines and the same amount of effort as code which is absolutely terrible, which is going to get you owned something serious. And the difference between all this is just the education piece. So in answer to your question, one of the things that we can do much better as an industry is to get people trained and to get them educated, because that just pays off in spades over and over again, project after project.
Oh, I thought you were saying something after that. I was just looking at this OWASP. I actually haven't seen this before. And Carl had a comment on it. So what does this? I see in here. Yeah, number one is injection, of course. Which is just unbelievable in this day and age. So does this actually tell us then kind of how we can mitigate that?
Yeah. So the nice thing about
how do I prevent this? Yeah, look at that.
That said, if you go down and for anyone who's not familiar with this, OWASP is OWASP. So if you do a Google for OWASP, you'll find it. And for each one of these risks, say injection, which incidentally is a superset of SQL injection. There is SQL injection and LDAP injection and other query languages which could be injected. And there'll be a single page here and it says, am I vulnerable? What are the example attack scenarios? How do I prevent it? And then they've got all of these references as well. So the nice thing about OWASP is that it does sort of lead you by the hand in terms of helping you understand the risk and then talking about how to mitigate it.
Yeah, this is awesome. Yeah, because it says, am I vulnerable? How do I prevent an injection? Example attack scenarios. I'm gonna have to read through this. This is actually fascinating. I was expecting something like I don't want to say white paper, but maybe like a specification where it's gonna be like 300 pages. Right. But this is actually, I mean, it's like a page for each one. I mean, like, shouldn't everybody go and read this?
You're expecting something boring, which is what a lot of the security content is. So, you know, on that education space, there's free and open material like this. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff on my blog as well. There's a lot of content on Pluralsight. I've got 31 courses on Pluralsight at the moment that cover stuff like this. I mean, if you really want to know about SQL injection, there's a 5-hour course. And Pluralsight is cheap. You know, you sit down there, you pay your $29 a month or whatever, and you watch 5 hours of content. And the chances of you screwing up SQL injection after that, if you're paying attention, are pretty slim.
Aspose offers a powerful set of file management APIs with which developers can create applications which can create, open, edit, and save the majority of popular business file formats. Their product range supports a multitude of file formats, including Word documents, Excel spreadsheets, PowerPoint presentations, PDF documents, OneNote, Outlook, Project, Visio files, popular image formats, and many others. Aspose produces APIs for .NET, Java, and the cloud, which can be utilized in almost any modern language available today. Visit aspose.com for a free 30-day no limitations trial, and if you get stuck, message the friendly support team for help. All technical support is offered free of charge. And remember, if you are a lucky winner, you will receive a free developer small business license for Aspose.net, a powerful toolkit for working with Word documents in your applications. So moving on to another topic, you run a site called Have I Been Pwned? It's a great site for us to see. We can kind of plug in like a personal account and see if they've been in any compromise. So kind of like, how does the site work, and how do you collect all of this information? How do you know that my email address was part of a compromise somewhere?
Yeah, good question. So Have I Been Pwned is a data breach aggregation service, which means that when companies get hacked and their data gets spread around the place, various nefarious parties out there obtain that. They often trade it. There's a really big data breach trading scene where people are either freely swapping data with each other or they're commercializing it. And occasionally this sort of floats up to enough of the surface where I can find it on online sources. A lot of people who support what I'm doing send me the data, and I get all of this and I aggregate it. And I load it all into Azure. It all goes into a massive Azure table storage service. And then you come along to the site and you plug your email address in, and it comes back and it tells you where you've appeared. And basically, the sort of maintenance of this project largely involves people sending me data, me going through, parsing it, making sure it's legitimate, loading it into the system. And then I've got 1.3 million something subscribers to the service. And every time I load data in there, it goes through that list and it says, okay, well, you're in this breach. I'm going to send you an email. And it's a free service. You just plug in your address and you then inevitably, sooner or later, you get notifications.
Yep. Yeah, I put my stuff in. I actually did this a long time ago, and now you have 3.9 billion accounts. So that's basically leaked instances, right? Leaked counts.
That's right. I got a feeling it's
crazy.
4 billion by the end of the day, actually. some other stuff I'm dealing with at the moment.
It should say billions and billions served.
Yeah, I know. And to be clear as well, when we talk about almost 4 billion, this is records, and there's actually probably about 3 billion unique email addresses, or maybe just under 3 billion. And the reason why is that people like myself have appeared in multiple different data breaches. So I have been in Adobe, LinkedIn, Dropbox, Plex, a bunch of these ones. So I have sort of one email address, which has ultimately been exposed many times, resulting in multiple records.
And what I think is really great about this, like I can log in with my main credentials here and see that it was leaked in at least 3 different known occasions. And then I use LastPass, so I go through there and I look at the passwords that are used, and I'm using unique passwords. So I'm like, okay, I changed the password for that particular account, and it didn't affect any of my other accounts. So I have a good deal of comfort when I see my name on this site, and I can use my other tools to trace that.
Yeah, and this is really the hopefully the end game for your everyday consumers, is that if you're using a password manager and you're creating strong and in particular unique accounts on each one of these services, it's never fun seeing your data leaked, but at least that's isolated, right? It's like, okay, I've been exposed in say Dropbox. That password was genuinely unique. And in fact, when I got the Dropbox data in August last year, the way I verified it is that my email address was in there with a bcrypt hash of a password. And I went to my 1Password password manager and I pulled out this crazy random 40-character password, whatever it was, bcrypt hashed it and went, oh, look, they're the same. What are the chances of that? Well, the chances of that are basically 0 because it is a genuinely random password and it's exactly the same as the one in Dropbox. But it meant that my risk was isolated to that one Dropbox account, and they never would have cracked the password in a million years anyway.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I'm trying to think if there's any flaws with that verification, but that makes sense because nobody would put you in their database. Yeah, because they wouldn't know the password. So yeah, that's a pretty good. So you need to make sure you sign up for like every site that's out there that we can verify it. So
here's the neat thing that I can do now, because I've got these 1.3 million something subscribers. I have a subscriber in every data breach. So what I tend to do now is when I get a new breach,
Cross-reference.
and I can cross-reference. Now, if I'm not immediately sure whether it's legit, and I'll give you an example of how I can be sure it's legit. If I get given an alleged breach, there's 1 million records in there, and I'll go through and I'll pick out a few email addresses. And what I'll normally do is I'll find Mailinator addresses. So Mailinator is this free service where you can send an email to anything at mailinator.com, and then you go to mailinator.com and then you can check the mailbox. So they're not intended to be private accounts. They're really accounts that are like throwaway, like I just created this thing because I needed an account to get through the front door. So I'll go through and I'll find, say, 3 Mailinator accounts amongst the 1 million, and I'll go to the password reset on the website that's the one that's been allegedly breached, and I'll plug it in, and if each one of those accounts gets an email, it's like, okay, this is very, very likely going to be legit. Now, you can't always do that, and there are also times where I need to be extra confident. So I will take those 1 million addresses, I'll find the last, say, 30 Have I Been Pwned subscribers that were in there, and then I'll send them an email and go, hey, look, you've popped up in a data breach somewhere. Would you like to help verify it? And of course, they're always curious. So they say, yeah, I'll help. So that sort of gives me the reach to always have someone who is in that data, who has given me their data with the expectation of being told when something like this happens.
Very cool.
So you also have an API for Have I Been Pwned. So what are the interesting things that you've seen people build off of your free API here?
Look, there's been a heap of stuff, both good and bad. So I've had to take a few, let's say, defensive measures here. Look, the good stuff, you'll see that there's actually an API consumers page. It lists things like iOS apps, Android apps, Windows Phone apps. It lists integration into various other security tools, open source intelligence tools. I know that there are many organizations that I've spoken to in the past that have said, look, we've used this to go through and check the exposure of people in our company. Now, incidentally, there is actually a free domain search tool, which is much better than just going and plugging in individual addresses.
Oh, yeah.
Because it just tells you here's... Yeah, well, it's funny how many people don't see it, because I get emails and they say, hey, this is awesome, but it would be really neat if there was a way of searching across entire domain. And I'm like, yeah, just like that link in the nav which says domain search. And often people miss it, but that is there. And again, that's free as well. You've just got to verify that you control the domain, and that'll come back and give you info. So there's sort of some of the ways the API has been used. There was a point there, in fact, probably for the first 2.5 years, it was not rate limited. It was intended to be as easily consumable as much as possible. And if I'm honest, I'm kind of surprised I went that long before people started screwing with it in ways that they probably shouldn't have been. But probably around August last year, I just started seeing a huge amount of enumeration of it. So what I was seeing was people working through very large lists of data in a sequential fashion. And this was email addresses which were clearly not part of one organization. And then on top of that, I was finding that there was just a sudden influx of requests coming from a lot of Eastern European IP addresses with randomized user agent strings and stuff that made it hard to actually identify a pattern of abuse and sort of lock out one IP or one user agent. So I started seeing, I guess, unethical behavior. So eventually I put a rate limit on it and said, look, you can make one request every 1500 milliseconds. And that's fine for sort of normal, legitimate use. But if you're bad guys, then that puts a stop to things pretty quickly.
That works. So whenever you first created the site, like what gave you the idea to create this? And was there anything else like this? I mean, is this the first of its kind? I mean, it's the first that I ever heard of for sure.
Well, in answer to the first question, it was a combination of I was doing analysis on data breaches and I was looking for patterns, So what can we tell about the way people create passwords, for example, by looking at data breaches? And all the sorts of terrible things that you would assume about the way people create passwords is true. But the other thing I was finding that I found interesting was that the prevalence of one individual appearing across multiple data breaches. And I was looking at this going, I wonder if they know, do they know that they have been in all of these separate incidents?
Right.
And this was late 2013, and it was around the time of the Adobe data breach, and they had 150 million something accounts. And I was like, I should just make a service out of this. And at the same time, I was starting to do a lot more work with Azure, and I was like, let's build something cool on Azure. Yeah, because I think a lot of it's like this, right? I didn't want to do Hello World. Like I wanted to do something actually interesting and useful. And I didn't know that it would become popular and that it would teach me a lot about sort of scale and large traffic volumes and stuff like this. But it has. So that was sort of the genesis of it.
Yeah. So on Azure, I know you have some blog posts about that. Actually, I was kind of curious if you want to talk at all about the scale and costs and things like that, because I know you've talked about that in the past.
Yeah, so I guess in terms of the way it's put together, first of all, everything is platform as a service. So I am a big supporter of not being responsible for infrastructure, and I'm just amused every time people say, but it means you can't remote in, you can't see like the blinky lights, and you can't install stuff. And I don't want the responsibility. Yeah, exactly. Thank goodness, right? And particularly at the time, I was working in a corporate role, and I was responsible for architecture and the design of how we'd build a lot of these systems. And every time I tried to push people towards PaaS, you'd get this very old school thinking pushback from the IaaS school, where it's like, we want servers. Yeah. And Have I Been Pwned was a really good example, or a really good opportunity to demonstrate why PaaS is so powerful. So it all runs on the Azure App Service, which we used to call websites. As I said before, all the data sits in table storage. And table storage is probably the best thing I ever did for this service, because it cost me, for the almost 4 billion records, it's around about $40 a month for the storage. Like, it is super, super cheap.
Yeah.
The way I've partitioned the data means the lookups are ridiculously fast. So we're talking about as little as around about 6 milliseconds to pull one record out of the system. So if you search for your email address, and I've partitioned it down via domain and alias, so these are the two parts of the things you're searching for. The value or the key lookup is very quick. So that happens super fast. It scales, for all intents and purposes, infinitely. I've never met any sort of performance thresholds through organic use. The only time I meet performance threshold is when I'm loading large volumes of data. But certainly, even on days where I've had 1 million people come to the site, like, table storage is not the thing that's going to give. So it uses that as well, and it uses a relational database for a bit of processing, but it uses a very small scale, and I just ramp it up when I need to. And that's pretty much the nuts and bolts of it. And in essence, the objective I have in running this is I try and keep it to what you might spend on a couple of cups of coffee a day. And that doesn't always work out that way. Like, if I have massive amounts of data to load, there are times where I do use some VMs for some processing, and I need larger databases. But for all intents and purposes, it works out in the low hundreds of dollars per month to run it, which I'm enormously happy with.
That's really cool. I love the work you do around those blog posts.
Yeah, a lot of them, just for everyone listening, that they're also for me. They're not just for you. Like, if I write the blog post, as I'm writing it, I'm going, wow, I actually hadn't thought about that. Now that I need to explain it to someone, I'm looking at the problem differently. And I find them enormously useful just to help get my own thought processes down.
Taking a swing back to security, I mean, we see a lot of companies doing maybe things that are not only bad now, but maybe questionable back when everybody did them. I'm thinking like not letting people paste in passwords and stuff. How can we, as users, help them improve? I mean, a lot of times these companies, you let them know and they get hostile when you give them this kind of feedback. How can we make an improvement on this?
Or they just don't understand it. I mean, I've seen even Troy tweeting at a company saying like, why don't you let me do this? And they come back with the stupidest answers. I mean, they just...
We have never been hacked.
Yeah, well, no, they come back.
That was one response to something.
Or they'll say like, it's for your security. And it's like, oh...
Because security. This is the reason. It's like, why do you do this crazy, stupid thing? Because security. So I think that there are some interesting things there. So one of the points was around things that would have been questionable at the time and are now just sort of downright unacceptable. One of the interesting things that I find with data breaches, let's take sort of something like MySpace. MySpace had 360 million odd accounts exposed. And from memory, they were storing passwords as SHA-1 or something that we would say today is just totally not cool. One of the challenges with data breaches is that very often these have either happened some time ago in the past, or they have happened to systems that were designed some time ago. And what we end up doing is we end up effectively judging the organization's security practices of yesterday's based on the standards of today. And I can sort of get how we've still got a lot of MD5s and SHA-1s and things like that out there because these are systems designed a long time ago. Now, that unfortunately, a lot of them just haven't had the love to be maintained and upgraded. In terms of other things, it's interesting how much our idea of what is secure versus not secure has changed. So I'll give you guys a scoop. I'm writing a blog post at the moment, which I'll get out either this week or next. And it's called Passwords Evolved, Authentication Guidance for the Modern Era. And this goes through a whole bunch of things that have changed, that we used to do yesterday that we don't do today. And I've referenced a lot of material from NIST. They just came out with some really interesting material around digital identity guidelines, and also a lot of stuff from the NCSC in the UK. This is the National Cybersecurity Centre. And this is stuff like they have said, for example, you must allow passwords to be 64 characters or more. There's a lot of websites that still limit it to 20 or 10. Microsoft still limits it to 16. If you want to have a Microsoft account or anything on Azure.
I'm actually kind of surprised by that, to be honest.
Yeah. And also everyone stop emailing me. I can't do anything about it. So, I know that this happens. I know that it's confusing.
Well, I can we have a our internal Yammer system, and we can actually send messages to Satya. That might be something that I post out there.
I would love that. My hesitation is at the number of times this has come up, and I've certainly discussed it internally at Microsoft before as well. And the simple answer is that there are loads of legacy dependencies, which is often the reason for many companies.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's not like it's just some character sitting in code or in a database where they just go, oh, no problem, we'll just switch this to 1,000.
Yeah, this is not like we're going to change our varchar 16 to like a varchar 64.
Right, exactly.
Oh, God, I hope that's not the case. It's not the case. Crap.
It's actually using Visual Source Safe on the back end.
Oh, jeez. That along with Paint is another name I haven't heard for many years.
Yeah,
for good reason. There's a lot of other stuff in here as well. Things like allowing special characters, which seems kind of obvious. There's a lot of systems that don't allow angle brackets or apostrophes because they're trying to prevent against XSS and SQL injection and other things which frankly there shouldn't be a problem with passwords anyway. But one of the curious bits of guidance here as well is that NIST has come out and said verifiers, i.e. websites that are implementing verification rules, should not impose other composition rules. For example, requiring a mixture of different character types and prohibiting consecutively repeated characters. Now, this is curious because our sort of conventional wisdom has said, you got to have a lowercase, an uppercase, a number, and a symbol, and some other weird, bizarre combination. And what's interesting in terms of the way that authentication has evolved now is we're using things like passphrases. And passphrases may be a lowercase sentence with some spaces. You may not have uppercase. You may not have symbols. Mm-hmm. So, that stuff's changed. Password hints, they've said, are definitely out. Password hints were terrible. You don't know what the password is. Here, let me give you as an unauthenticated user a suggestion as to what it might be.
Well, and now they don't allow you to put the password in the hint.
Well, yeah,
it's probably a good thing.
I've pulled the password hints from the Adobe data breach because they're all in there in plain text.
Oh, God.
And some of the top hints were things like my name, Adobe, usual, email. So, like when someone says my password hint is email and it's sitting there next to the email address, take a guess.
Oh.
You guys have mentioned things like password managers, letting them paste in. One of in fact, there's two other really interesting things in here that I'll call out. One of them is that the other thing that goes against conventional wisdom is guidance now saying you shouldn't force password rotation on a regular cadence. Now, we have probably all been in environments where it's like, oh, look, it's the end of the quarter. You got to have a new password. And you go, okay, +1 to the end. And I know how long I use the same password for. No, I tell you, I think maybe as I get a little bit older, I'm more comfortable saying how bad I've screwed stuff up or the shortcuts that I've taken myself. And I know how long I'd used the same password in the last company because I could take the number at the end and divide it by 4, and that's how many years I'd had it for. Because this is what people do. So the guidance these days from the likes of NIST and the NCSC is, unless there is a reason to change it, don't. Because if a hacker does get your password, it's not like they're going to go, well, I'll come back in like 3 months and use it. No, they're going to use it straight away before you change it. And then the final thing, which I think is really interesting, and this is more sort of the modern era sort of thing, is NIST in particular have said, when processing requests to establish and change memorized secrets, verifiers shall compare the prospective secrets against a list that contain values known to be commonly used, expected, or compromised. For example, this list may include, but is not limited to, passwords obtained from previous breach corpuses. So what they're saying is that as an organization, if people can create passwords on your system, you should make sure that those passwords haven't appeared in previous data breaches, which is really interesting guidance.
Yeah. And that can be pretty intensive. I mean, they're going to have to come to your API and you're going to have to start charging for that. Or they're going to have to build something.
Yeah, so I have something else that's going to come out probably next week that'll help us address this. But
okay.
It will be a free thing as well. But that I find a really interesting reflection of the state we're in at the moment, which is that there are so many credentials floating around out there on the web. You could have for all intents and purposes, a strong password, but it might be out there. And you might use that strong password in multiple places. A lot of people do this. They'll say, my password strategy is I'm going to have like one password for my not very important stuff, and one for the medium important stuff, and then one that I'm going to use on all my banks and credit cards and government stuff.
That seems terrible.
Well, it does for us sort of sitting here, objectively looking at this, but I get how for a lot of normal everyday people that they kind of, they're segmenting risk.
Yeah, I could see the line of thinking, I guess, that would get you into that, I suppose.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah. You're still putting all your eggs in one basket. You're just putting all your golden eggs in one basket and all your regular eggs in a different basket.
Well, that's true, but a lot of people don't have the tools they need in order to be able to manage passwords securely. And one of the extracts I've got in this blog post from, I can't remember who created the material, it was either NIST or NCSC, they said, look, even as organizations, you should provide sanctioned tooling for people to be able to create strong passwords. And for everyone listening, have a think about it. Your company almost certainly says you should have a strong password. It's got to have these mix of characters. You've got to change it regularly. Mm-hmm. You've got to do all these things, which is just infeasible to do across the breadth of accounts that we have. So if you can't do this and store it in your memory, you've got to have some sort of password management tool. How many organizations actually give people a sanctioned tool to securely manage passwords? And it's very, very few.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I shouldn't leak out internal policy, but I know of at least one company that does that.
I actually ask this question. So I go into companies and do workshops and very often we'll have this discussion about good password structure. And everyone agrees like what constitutes a good password. And then you say, okay, so does your company give you tools to actually do that? No. No. Yeah, and we're not allowed to install anything on our machine, so I can't just go and, download one password or something like that.
Yeah. So at my last company, I would talk to the Sarbanes-Oxley auditors, and they were the ones that were bringing up the whole password change issue. And I'd go to them saying, hey, I think it's a bad practice to make us change the passwords all the time because that just drives this behavior of writing on a Post-it note. I mean, let's take it to an extreme. Let's say a person had to have a new password every day and you made you required it was totally different than the one the previous day. You're just forcing them to write it down somewhere, and you're decreasing security by doing that. And the Sarbanes-Oxley auditor is like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But we still have to do it this way, just because the rule was the rule and there was just no changing it. And I had a whole bunch of security things that I brought up, and he's like, yeah, you're right. That would be better security, but that doesn't follow these public rules. And I was like, are you kidding me? So it's like these, I don't want to call them like government regulations, but they really are, but they're sort of misguided or maybe misinterpreted. Government regulations are causing weaker security, these companies, which is insane to me.
So I'm going to send you guys a link in our chat window here, and you might want to share this because this is a classic. And I thought about it as soon as you mentioned SOCs and auditors. Yeah. There's a server fault question which is titled "Our Security Auditor is an Idiot," and it goes through the sorts of things that this security auditor has asked them for, which is like, you've got to provide us all the passwords in plain text and things like this. And the security auditor is basically berating this guy saying, I've been doing this for however many years and this is the way the industry works. And you can't help but think that there are all these sort of bygone era practices and ideals. But what is really nice about this NIST stuff I was just mentioning is, like you would expect NIST to potentially be a little bit stuck in the older times because it is sort of government funded and all the rest of it. But it does have really, really good modern day guidance where a lot of it flies in the face of conventional wisdom. But it's like you said, when you sort of take a step back and you look at it and you go, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. Like this is, we probably shouldn't just be continually changing passwords for no reason.
Right. Oh my God, this post. Oh my God, this is.
I've read this one before. It's pretty epic.
Earth to Kill Rising. Holy cow. Oh man. And the thing is, like, I almost don't want to believe this, but I was in this situation and it was so frustrating. So like this is totally legit. This is just unbelievable, man. How frustrating. So like even the people that know, like the right things to do, or they kind of know the right direction to go, are not empowered to do so. I mean, that's crazy. Okay, well, we have to move on from that question.
Don't wait for users to report problems. Raygun gives you complete visibility on errors, crashes, and performance problems affecting your end users. Replicate issues in seconds rather than digging through log files or having to rely on users to report errors or crashes. Raygun gives you a window into how users are really experiencing your software applications, supports all major programming languages and platforms, and integrates with your current development workflow tools too. There's a free 14-day trial, and it takes minutes to implement, so start resolving issues in your application, and check it out today at raygun.com.
So I'm kind of curious around social media attacks, or not even social media, this social engineering. Because let's just say we have perfect security, and I've heard this stat, and I don't know if this is true or not, but this whole thing where like 90% of users will give up their password for a candy bar. I don't know if that's true, but like I've worked with people, and I guess they knew me, but people that I haven't known very well, it's like, oh, hey, I need to fix this thing. And I'm like, what's your password? And like, they just happily give it up. I mean, without a second guess. So like, aren't we totally screwed because of all this social engineering? I mean, doesn't that just totally destroy all the work that you're doing?
So, firstly, social engineering is enormously powerful because it's something that is just really, really effective at circumventing digital controls. While we're sending links around, I'm going to give you another one, which is kind of interesting to that effect. This is a Jimmy Kimmel piece from, when was this? Probably, 2015, where a reporter goes out on the street in Hollywood and is asking people what their passwords are or how they create passwords. And these people are just telling them. They're like, oh, it's my dog's name and the year I graduated high school. And then the reporter's like, oh, what kind of dog have you got? Which is not related to the password, but it creates this rapport. And then they go, oh, it's like a fox terrier or something like that. Oh, what's his name? And then this stuff, it's a video, so you got to listen to it later, but it is hilarious. So there's that side of things, which is very, very effective. And then the problem we've got is that people are so susceptible to being engineered by a friendly operator, and they're so. I think what it is that people innately want to believe other people are good and don't necessarily approach everything with suspicion, but it is so easy to engineer them in so many different ways. Now, a really good example of engineering is that if you're on Facebook.com and you press F12 to go to the dev tools, and then you click on the console tab. Now, many people probably wouldn't have realized this is there. I'm going to do it again so I can read it. Down to console is a big red warning. It says, stop. This is a browser feature intended for developers. If someone told you to copy and paste something here to enable a Facebook feature or hack someone's account, it is a scam and will give them access to your Facebook account. Now, this is referred to as self-XSS. And what it is it's literally someone writing JavaScript and then telling someone else to run it in the console of their browser in the context of a site like Facebook.
That's unbelievable.
And what the question you got to ask yourself here is that if you could run whatever JavaScript, so you being an attacker, you could run whatever JavaScript you wanted in someone else's browser in the context of any website, what would you do? And it's like, well, you could do a lot. You can steal cookies. You can redirect them to other places. You can post to their wall. You could make them befriend you. It is an endless set of possibilities. And this, again, is social engineering because someone, and I imagine they're kids, right? So one kid's going, hey, if you want to see which girls at school like you, just copy this great big obfuscated whack of JavaScript, hit F12, go to console, paste, enter, job done. And this is precisely what it is. And it's just amazing that this is a thing, but this is social engineering in action.
Yeah, how do they do this? This is Facebook that's like writing to the console, right? But how do they change the font and everything? These are all console features, apparently?
Well, you can view source and you can see it, but yeah, it's you can do this in the console. So you can write in a nice, very overt fashion like this. And when you think about it, this is actually a really neat defense as well because it's the simplest thing. It's just logging to console, but it's really, really obvious too.
Yeah. That is crazy that they had to do that.
I know.
Makes sense.
I am just a little bit impressed, to be honest, that people are actually doing this. You know, not just Facebook, that other people have sort of weaponized these attacks. But this is also an area where there are some really neat security defenses as well. So we've got things like content security policies, CSPs, which is a response header in the website. And the response header will tell you things like, these are the places that the website is allowed to post forms to. This is where they're allowed to load JavaScript from. This is where they can load CSS from. And these CSPs can be really, really resilient to attacks like this, and particularly to traditional XSS attacks, where people want to embed a script from an external source into your site, or they want to change the login form so it posts to an attacker's site. So we've got evolving defenses that can help tackle this stuff as well.
So before you mentioned kind of offhand that, some companies would call you in so they wouldn't have to hear about themselves on your blog. and a lot of that is you see how some companies have acted really poorly to insecurities, but there's some companies out there that have been applauded for releasing when they've been hacked or have data exfiltrated. So what kind of tips can you give us so if our company happens to be one of those companies, we can have a response plan to properly handle, what has happened?
Yeah, good question. So I have a blog post, and I'm going to give you guys more links for show notes and things as well. Now, this is data.
Oh, there you go. Can you hear us, Troy?
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, we're good.
Yeah, you're good.
Yep.
Might be the Australian internets. So let me try that again. There is a blog post. I just flicked you guys a link for this as well, called Data Breach Disclosure 101, How to Succeed After You've Failed. And this really sort of addresses that question. And it's a whole bunch of things. So, like a really obvious one for organizations is, do you actually have a way for people to submit security vulnerabilities? Now, this sounds like it's ridiculously simple, but it is so hard for me and for many other people when we learn of a vulnerability or an incident just to get in touch with the right people. And it sounds crazy, but it is just an absolute nightmare. And if you want to see a really good example of this, of how to do it right, go to Tesla, and on Tesla's legal page, they have a vulnerability reporting policy. And they say, here's the email address to contact us on. Here's a PGP key if you want to encrypt it. Here's how long it will take to get back to you. It's beautiful. So, just having a way of reporting makes things much easier. Treating any of these things with a sense of urgency. So if someone reports a vulnerability, actually take this seriously. Don't just go, hey, it's some nut job from somewhere. Prioritize this. Disclosure is a really important thing as well. And depending on where you are in the world, and even depending on what state you're in the US, you may have different disclosure responsibilities. But very often I'm seeing cases where organizations have had breaches and then they've tried to cover it up. I recently wrote a piece about the AA, which is the Automobile Association in the UK. And they covered up their data breach and then they got found out covering it up. So didn't work out real well for them. Lots of other things like disclosing it early if there's an incident. You can't just sort of sit on it for months whilst people's accounts are getting exploited. Usually organizations do this to minimize the reputation damage, but yeah, again, they get found out. It doesn't work really well. And a bunch of other tips. So, hopefully that's a good resource for people if the worst does happen.
And then I'm kind of curious what your take is on this. So this comes up all the time, and I know I've talked about it on the show quite a bit. This idea, there's all these devices that we're putting on the internet, including like coffee makers and things like that. Basically the Internet of Things. And I always see these Internet of Things breaches, and whenever they say Internet of Things, I always just replace it with computer. And you can feel free to disagree. Like, you're the person that has the credentials that can absolutely disagree with me. But I always see it as like, these things are just computers. I don't know why we attack the Internet of Things. I mean, there's clearly issues like, it feels like the Internet of Things as far as like computer security, like, the stuff that we do at Microsoft, like we use all the lessons that we learned in computer security and apply that to IoT, but it feels like these other companies aren't treating it like that. They treat them as something different. So I wanted to kind of hear your take on IoT.
Look, I can see it both ways. Just last month, I actually recorded a course with Pluralsight on IoT vulnerabilities. So this is something that's sort of been front of mind. It's not out yet, so hopefully it'll be out soon. Yeah. But there are different ways of looking at this. And one way of looking at it is that I guess what makes it IoT as opposed to just Internet of Computers is that we are extending connectivity into things that we just never had connectivity in before. So, for example, I've written before about the Cloud Pets teddy bears, where there are some serious vulnerabilities there which leaked a whole bunch of kids' voices. Now, we didn't have internet and teddy bears back in my day, or even like 5 years ago. You just didn't
we had Teddy Ruxpin.
Yeah, that was different, right? Like he did not have a Bluetooth device up his. Yeah. Anyway, so that was a very different situation. We are seeing IoT in everything from kettles to coffee makers to adult toys. And what all of this means is that we have risks in places that we never had them before. It also means that we have a whole bunch of issues. Well, you see, I try to be serious when I talk about this topic. Yep. It usually doesn't work. But since you've gone there, there is even a Twitter account dedicated to the testing of IoT adult toys. It's called Internet of Dongs. And part of the bio explains what it does in a very serious way, and it finishes the bio by saying, please stop laughing. But it is actually, in all seriousness, it is a fascinating thing insofar as we are now seeing connectivity in a device which we never had this sort of connectivity in before. Mm-hmm. It's collecting data of a nature that we never had data for before. And we've already seen a recent lawsuit where I believe the plaintiffs ended up getting about $13,000 each because the activity of when they were using the device was recorded and sent to the manufacturer of the device without them knowing it. Mm-hmm. Now, we never had that problem before. So one of the things we're seeing is IoT is in places and collecting data, which is an all-new challenge. But then we're also seeing the same old challenges, and I think this goes to the point just now about it being computers, where the Cloud Pets thing, this was a teddy bear recording voices, but the big issue they had is they had their MongoDB sitting there in a publicly facing network segment with no password. Now, whether you've got a teddy bear recording voices or you've got some enterprise-y web app, if your database sits on the internet without a password, you're going to have a bad day of it. Yep. So, there's those aspects that are very interesting. Then there's the aspect of very often these IoT devices do actually allow remote control, and they will move physical parts of a device based on external commands. And there was a case I was involved in earlier last year with Nissan, the car maker, where they have a car called a Nissan Leaf, and you can pick up your iPhone or your Android and you can turn on the temperature control in the car. So you can turn on the heating, turn on the air conditioning. And the only auth they had on this thing was it used the VIN number of the car in order to identify which car.
Which is visible externally.
Now, there are two problems with the VIN number. Now, keeping in mind this was used as an API key. One problem is that API key is printed in the windscreen of every car. Right. So, yeah, not so good. The other problem is that they're easily enumerable because you could take the last 5 digits and just keep guessing numbers. Right. And every now and then you'd hit another car. Uh-huh. And we actually tested this. Someone in my workshop found it. So this was the ease, right? Someone who had 1 hour of training on this particular topic found this problem. And what we identified is that we could hit an API endpoint that brings back the battery status. And we were testing to see whether this was something that needed to be reported to Nissan or not. And we just kept guessing VIN numbers, and you'd see bing, 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 like here's different VIN numbers of different cars suddenly come up. And yeah, you actually have access to their battery status, their trip history, and we can turn their air conditioning on or off.
You could theoretically drain the battery, right?
Well, you could drain the battery. There's the privacy aspect of it as well, right? Yeah. Which is that, fortunately, I didn't have GPS data, but you know what time of day, what distance, and you can start to create patterns of behavior. Mm-hmm. And you know, that was another good example to the earlier point about reporting incidents as well. I reported it to Nissan the very next day, and a month later, they still hadn't fixed it, couldn't give an ETA, basically just didn't want to deal with it. And then I went public with it. So it is very, very hard, even once you find something as egregiously bad as that, to actually get it fixed.
Mm-hmm. So I follow Internet, I don't want to beep this out. So Internet of SHIT.
Yeah.
I follow them on Twitter. And the one that I saw today was, it was a coffee machine. There were coffee machines that were being installed at a chemical factory's network. So I'll read you this little portion here. So long story short, the coffee machines are supposed to be connected to their own isolated Wi-Fi network. However, the person installing the coffee machine connected the machine to the internal control room network. So it then basically they ended up essentially what it sounds like is bridging these two different networks, giving a path into the chemical factory, bringing the factory down. So, there you have it. But it's a fun Twitter feed to follow as well. Cause they point out, all these like silly devices that we're putting online. Like, I don't know. I have two different feelings on this because, I feel like we as the human species, like have the ability to secure these things. But at the same time, we're not doing it. Not, at least most of them are unsecured or poorly secured.
I think what we're seeing is just all of the bad practices that we've got in so much sort of web software that runs in the browser now being extended to all these other things. Yeah. And one of the things that strikes me, whether it be IoT or apps, rich client apps on devices, is that the actual transport layer gets abstracted like one level behind. And what I mean by this is that if you're in the browser and you go to a site that, let's say, has no HTTPS, it's really obvious, and your browser's warning you now. If it has an invalid certificate, big red stuff everywhere. If you see a URL that has like user ID equals 200 in it, you look at it and you go, I wonder what would happen if I change it to 201. Mm-hmm. And when you go to any sort of rich client, that gets one level further back. And then the rich client can do things like not make HTTPS connections, not validate certificates. It hides these URLs that just by visibly looking at them look dodgy. And it just seems to be another veneer on top of all the lousy things that happen everywhere else, except it just gets pushed further and further away from visibility.
Yeah. Wow. Use a good framework, people. Build on top of a good platform. Anything else that you wanted to mention? You're just dying to tell us?
When you mention that, using a good platform, so one of the things I see is that people do a really good job of screwing up even good platforms. Now, I demonstrate this myself. So I have a website called hackyourselffirst.troyhunt.com.
Okay.
And it's got about 50 plus different security vulnerabilities in there. It's got SQL injection and stuff all over the place. It's designed for people to play with and to see how security vulnerabilities work and then not go to jail. Now, all of that is built on MVC and Azure, and it's all like current modern day stack, and it's terrible. In the defense of particularly of ASP.NET, I had to try hard to screw some of this up. This was not easy. Getting things like auth cookies to actually not be HTTP only is actually a hard thing to do. You need to try to mess that stuff up. So certainly these technologies can help you fall into the pit of success, but there just seems to be like no end to human creativity of how bad you can make a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, guns have safeties, but you can still shoot yourself in the foot. Okay, should we move on? So my pick of the week, I have a time zone pick of the week, which you've never had before, but it's Time Zone Converter, and it's at timeanddate.com. So I'll have a link in the show notes. This thing is amazing. So the reason this came up, I always talk about how difficult scheduling podcasts is. And now basically we're scheduling you tomorrow because it's the 24th here in the US and it's the 25th in Australia. Good morning, by the way. And and I had no idea how to figure this out. And I'm like, man, I need something that lets me like say at this time, what is it in this other place? So I found this beautiful page that lets you go in here. You can drop in any number of time zones or cities. So I actually dropped in Redmond, I put in Green Bay, and then I put in Gold Coast, Australia. And then there's a little slider at the bottom and I can slide that back and forth and actually changes all 3 times. So for whatever time I want in whichever time zone, I can figure out what it is in these other ones. So I said, okay, this is at 3 p.m. my time, which meant that it was 8 a.m. your time and it was 5 p.m. Carl's time. So this, I don't know. I just wanted to promote this thing because it was amazing for what I wanted to use it for. So that's my time zone pick of the week. So Troy, there's a game that we play on the show. What I need to do is I need to pick a number between 1 and 4 inclusive and let me know what it is.
Okay, let's go 4.
4. Okay. Okay, this is a kid's game. Let me find a card here. Okay, here we go. Would you rather live in a house made from Legos or live in a house made from mud and palm leaves?
I want to say Lego, but I know I'd step on the bits inevitably, and that's a whole other problem. I'm going to go mud.
But it'd be easy to fix.
Palm leaves. Well, yeah, but then
although expensive.
The insulating qualities of mud as well, I think it might be useful.
I wonder, wouldn't Lego be like super insulating though? I mean, if you had like a 4-inch wall of Lego, I mean, think of all the air and plastic in there.
Yeah, maybe if you make it deep enough. I don't know. I did not prepare for this question, if I'm honest.
So equal thickness of mud and Lego, which has better insulating properties? So somebody send us a note or send us an email. And we'll mention you on the show next time, whoever, if somebody can answer that definitively, because I'm kind of curious now. Because I'm thinking the air, but mud would be pretty darn good too. So, okay. Carl, pick a number.
I'll take number 1.
Number 1. Would you rather suddenly turn into a dolphin and be in the ocean, or suddenly turn into a monkey and be in the rainforest?
Dolphin.
Wow,
not thinking at all about that one.
Yeah, I don't even care about the question anymore. I just impressed by the speed of the answer. He's just like, whatever it is, I'm gonna pick the first one. Very cool.
Dolphins are pretty cool, and they live in tropical areas. Not too many predators.
Yeah.
Monkeys, you got a lot of predators.
Yeah, and you got
rainforest. Yeah, inclement weather.
You got this urge to throw your feces. Yeah.
Yeah, and dolphins love to play all the time. You know, it just looks like a lot better deal.
Well, dolphins aren't perfect.
They're not, but they're better than monkeys.
But anyway,
those damn dirty apes.
Yeah. So Troy, where can people find you?
So TroyHunt.com is probably the easiest place. If you want to go to a website, if you want to find me on Twitter, I'm Troy Hunt. And if you want to look at the Have I Been Pwned things, it's Have I Been Pwned, which is pwned.com as well. So any of those places, you'll find me there. Or you can find me on Google, probably Bing as well even. I don't know.
Yes, you can. Don't be like that. I use Bing as my main search engine. It is possible. And I'm not I don't use everything Microsoft, but I do use Bing. There's nothing wrong with Bing. So Carl, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Carl Schweitzer.
And you can find me at ytechie.com or on Twitter at twitter.com/ytechie. So Troy, thank you so much for coming on here and talking about security in a lot of different aspects. It's very cool and important stuff.
No worries. Hey, it's been a pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me.